Hi guys, it's Blackie and welcome to my class on the 1851 Navy. Okay, the 1851 Navy, the Colt, is to me one of the most iconic and beautiful guns that Colt ever produced. The look of it, the feel of it, the way it handles. To me it's just one of the classiest guns there is. But before we get in depth into the Colt, I'd like to just take a moment and explain a little history of where this came from and why it fit into the niche it did. Colt began in the 1830s of creating his, what we came to be known as the Percussion line. And Colt's very innovative design of there was already some guns that you could cock and the cylinder rotate, or you had guns that would auto cock but you manually rotate the cylinder. It was Colt that got all the pieces to work together so that whenever I pulled the hammer back, it automatically rotated and locked the cylinder in place, lining up with the bore. He got all the little pieces to work out. But when he came up with the Percussion, and really, let's just be honest, the Percussion is more of a prototype than anything, and production numbers were not very high. And many people of the day even said that only Colt seemed to be the only one that could make it work absolutely reliably as far as timing. Well, that was going to be refined. But this is, the time period is the 1830s. Now, this is still the Mountain Man era when we're thinking about history. This is the time of Jeremiah Johnson and the westward expansion, where rendezvous were going on, where trappers would spend a year or so in the mountains of the Rockies, and then companies would leave out of St. Louis and go out there and meet them someplace and exchange the fur for the goods they need to be out there. So guns like Hawkins and stuff like big bore, heavy muzzle loaders were in the demand, you know. When you look at how firearms of the day had changed, prior to the Revolutionary War, most of the guns were large caliber, like 62, 68, 69, 75 caliber, etc., even 80s. By the end of the Revolutionary War and by the very late 1700s, the calibers had dropped down to where you saw a lot more 36 calibers and even 25 calibers, because the big game was kind of gone in the eastern part of the United States, and what we were left with was mostly small game. So you'd see 20-to-1 rabbits and bunnies to that one elk. And so the guys preferred the small caliber because it was less powder, less lead, so your resources were more, you know, and this was flintlocks. So no caps yet, this was flintlocks. And so that was where they were coming from. That was the mindset of the day. By early 1800, and we started doing the western expansion, the calibers started to go back up a little because we were encountering big animals out west, like bear, grizzly, big elk, moose, things like that. We still had moose and some things on the east, but not nearly like we used to have. And so the calibers started going back up a little. Okay? Now let's talk about handguns. Handguns in this time period, in the 1830s, were either very small, graceful dueling guns, and only the wealthy could afford those. Or they were often cut down larger gun parts, such as the parts for a trade gun, a 62 caliber trade gun, that had been just made into a pistol configuration. Okay? So pistols were these big, long, think pirate guns, pirate pistols. That's what we think of when we see one, because even though it's a different time period. But you think of the pirate with these sashes and these guns stuck into their sashes, and that was how many people carried them. Okay? Holsters were not common yet. And so in the 1830s, when Colt came out with the Percussions and started making those guns, they were really ahead of their time in many ways, because the average person, cap lock, percussion cap, was 10 years or less old. Most people had heard of it, very few had actually seen it. Flintlock was still the dominant gun ignition source throughout the country. And so percussion caps were seen as kind of like today, you've heard of electronic ignition modern rifles. I mean, Remington made rifles in like deer hunting calibers that it doesn't have a primer, it has an electronic way of igniting it. Yeah, it exists, but do you have one? No. Well, that's the way it was with percussion cap in the 1830s. People that were around cities or settlers or had this supply chain would trust and utilize percussion caps. But the guys that were not, flintlock was still holding their own. Up to the Civil War, flintlock was still a major ignition source in the United States. And pistols were big, bulky things that were normally carried in a sash or up on the pommel of a horse. They weren't made for long-range accuracy. They were a up-close, get-off-me weapon. Think of like a sawed-off shotgun. Many of them were loaded with shot rather than one big ball. So when Colt came in and began to try to get into this market, he was really fighting uphill. His new design was so radically, yes, it had 5 shots, but he had 25, 31 with the Pattersons, and his big bore in the Patterson was a 36 caliber 5-shot gun, and that's what the Texas Rangers utilized in their famous encounter, where they fought against Comanches, and they had these revolving Pattersons, which was really cutting edge, state of the art of the day. It was so rare nobody had heard of such things, really. It'd be like today if suddenly a group of military showed up with laser guns right out of Star Trek or something. You know, no one would be prepared to face that, and the Native Americans weren't prepared to face Captain Hayes with these Pattersons. It was from that and out of Texas, and because of Texas, that Walker, Samuel Walker, who went and found Colt and began talking with Colt about taking the Patterson design, but let's revise it. Let's make it into something bigger, more powerful. And that led to the Walker. Okay. Now, before I get completely off the Patterson, let me point out, I got my numbers written down. The Pattersons were around what was called the Texas model Patterson. This was a 7.5 to 9 inch barrel, although they made Pattersons from 12 to 4 inches. It's just whatever you asked for. And they were from 1838 to 1840, and there's about 1,000 of those made. That's really, you could say, the father of the 51 Navy. Because with this gun design, the Patterson, that had financially failed, and Colt had gone out of business and had gone off into other enterprises, whenever Walker came to him and said, look, I got government backing, let's redesign that gun of yours. And they really took a lot of the Patterson revolving rifle cues to make the Walker Colt. He wanted basically like a short pump shotgun, to get off me, big powerful gun that was a big boomer. But by now Colt had become more business savvy. And so yes, there was 1,000 Walkers, and then immediately he rolled over contracts to produce the Dragoons. But Colt was smart. He had learned. And so he shifted and went to making the small, what we call baby Dragoon. So this is the Colt line in 1847. Here at 47-48, we've got the little bitty pocket gun for personal concealment up close. And then you got this great big old horse pistol. Okay? Colt wanted something in between those. And he remembered the success of the Texas pattern Patterson. Can I make something roughly that size? Well, the refined lock work that he'd come up with the Walker was refined even more into the small pocket pistol. And that was the instrument that he would drive the rest of his line with. The pocket pistols were the #1 seller in total number of all of Colt's sales, by far. And from that, he improved that lock work. And that improvement, he then took the idea of the Texas Patterson with the loading lever, and taking the lock work improvements of the what's now called the 49 pocket model, and he put them together with the big bore caliber that had been in the Patterson, the 36. And he created a 6-shot belt model that was originally called the Ranger. Why? Texas Rangers. He was hoping for more military contracts because they had liked the Pattersons just like, like 10 years or less before, 7, 8 years before. And so maybe I could market this because it's kind of like the Patterson, but it's got the square back trigger guard of the Walker, the Dragoons, and the Baby Dragoon. The 49 pocket model went to the round trigger guard, and the 51 Navy, which began being in production in 1850, 1851, some sources go back and forth. But it would only in the early days have this squared back trigger guard, and then it would go to a round trigger guard. And the vast majority of the 51 Navies have the round trigger guard on when you see it. Now this one is a Colt 3rd issue or 3rd generation of called the Signature Series of 51 Navy. It has all the features as the Patterson had. It had a loading lever up front. It had a caliber of 36, but instead of the 5-shot, it's gone to a 6-shot cylinder. Now the roll engraving, okay, that was a copyright idea by Colt because this was very expensive. How this is produced is they have a wheel, a drum, and this pattern is carved onto it in relief so it's standing up. Think like a cookie cutter. And that drum is hardened, extremely hard, and then under a lot of pressure the blank of this cylinder is put up against it and it is turned and it presses like a cookie cutter digging in that pattern into it. That was a very intricate pattern, and the pattern that you see on this is of the Texas Navy engaging the Mexican Navy. Because of that, some people got to calling it the Navy because the Navy scene. But actually Colt came up with these roll engraves for the different ones. The Dragoons had a scene of horseback riders fighting the Indians. Captain Coffee, Hayes and them fighting the Comanche. That's on the Dragoons. The belt guns, which would be the 51 Navy and the later 1860 Army and 1861, all had this naval engagement scene. And then the pocket guns got a stagecoach hold-up scene that went on to the 49 pocket model. Later, it went on to the pocket Navy in 1863, and that was it. I believe the 31, the 36 got those small stagecoach scenes, and it was designed so that you could look at it and tell that was a Colt and not a copy. Because once Colt created this lock work, it's not that complicated. The complicated part was learning how to make the lock work geometry. Well, if I've got one, I can reverse engineer it. A gunsmith out in the wherever could take this apart and just copy it. Just reverse engineer it and make his own copy. But that roll engraving was extremely expensive. And so the odds are he wouldn't put that roll engrave on it, because that man had to cut your profits in half just to have that done. Colt was going for big production, so then it was just a little niche in his production cost. But for a guy in the gunsmithing thing that's trying to produce 100 of these revolvers a year, that would cut out his profits and make it just unprofitable for him to make it. And that's what Colt was going for. And that's why that roll engraving on it. Now, because of this, the belt caliber, okay, through the 1850s was 36 caliber. The 44 caliber was the big Dragoons and in Walkers. That was a horse gun. That wasn't supposed to be carried on your belt. That was supposed to be carried up on the pommel of the horse, on your saddle. And you pulled it out, and it was for cavalry to use. Big and powerful. Most people considered it way too big to carry. So that's what this was. This was a carrying gun for like military applications or a law enforcement officer or something like that. Whereas the actual pocket guns. The 49 pocket model outsold these because it was much smaller and more compact. Even though it was 31 caliber, it was considered, I guess you call it, more civilized. And so the 1849 gold rush to California saw the Colt guns just go through the roof. I have heard that a gun was being purchased in the East Coast for $13 and was being sold in the gold fields of California for $500. And that's not adjusted for inflation. So the price would be ridiculous. But those miners out there, for self-defense from claims jumpers and people trying to rob you, wanted a pocket gun or a belt gun. Well, why would you want a belt gun? So you could see it and know I'm armed. Don't mess with me. You gotta remember, we're going back to that mind of the day. They wanted a gun that they could see. That's the reason a lot of them still didn't carry them in holsters. They stuck them in a sash. And if you look at a lot of the drawings and period things of the 1850s, the limited amount of photography and things we had, it was very much in its infancy. You see a lot of these just simply stuffed in belts or stuffed into their waistband because they wore suspenders, and so they would just slide it in like that, and that's how they carried it. Even by the time of the shootout at the OK Corral, townspeople rarely wore holsters. A gun, even in law enforcement, was usually just stuck in the waistband or the pocket of their coats, of their dress. It was people that were working all the time in the field that would actually have a holster, like a cowboy or something like that. And so it was mentioned in the trial that came about because of the shootout at the OK Corral, that as they're approaching where the corral was, someone came up and spoke to the Wyatt Earp and them and said that there wasn't a problem, you know, calm down basically. And they'd said okay, and one of the brothers or whatever said he had shifted his gun back behind his waistband, behind his back. He had taken the gun out of the front of his waistband and stuck it in the back of his belt behind his coat. They weren't wearing holsters. So this long streamlined design with the trigger guard was a handy way to slide it into a belt or something like that. These were carried in many different ways just like that, even in shoulder holsters. But it was only after the Civil War that holsters became more readily apparent, and a lot of that was surplus military holsters. So the 51 Navy was the belt gun, okay, up until the Civil War. The pocket gun and the little gun was the hide-it gun. This was the wear-it-out and the open gun. And military officers around the world bought these. Now the total production, this was the second highest produced gun in all of Colt from the beginning of the Percussion era up to 1873, which is technically the end of the Percussion era, but we'll get to that in a moment. So the 51 Navy production was 215,000 units out of the Colt factory here in America, and it was 42,000 produced over in London. Colt went over to try to get foreign contracts and actually set up an operation in London to produce the Colt there. And he produced the 51 Navy. These will show up in period pieces for the British military and other militaries around the world. Sea captains bought these. This gun was the quintessential gun in only 10 years, because figure 51 is when the gun came out. Well, 1860, we're on the threshold of the Civil War, and this gun is in production, and it became major production during the Civil War. Both sides utilized it, both sides acquired it at every opportunity. Many very famous individuals carried the gun, soldiers, generals, and the like, during the Civil War. After the Civil War, the gun just didn't simply disappear. And that's something you got to understand. We think today, well, it's obsolete, it's old. The cartridge guns were far superior, and in many ways you're correct. Okay? But at the same time, the cost of one of these guns, immediately after the Civil War and these guns started being phased out, let's say by 1870, and definitely after 1873 when Colt ceased new gun production, Still had tons of parts. And Colt was still selling the parts for this gun up until the 1880s and early 90s. There's some records of that. And some guns were still being assembled from parts. Because you would contact Colt and say, I want a 51 Navy. I want it engraved such and such. And it's not production, but they got the parts. They'd put one together. And collectors have found guns like that. Plus, sometimes guns that had been a military issue and had been returned to Colt for damage or whatever had been redone. A new cylinder would be put to it or whatever, and then it would be sold on the civilian market as surplus. So these guns kept being used. Plus, after the Civil War, there was, like I said, 200,000, pushing 300,000 of these floating around, not to mention the hundreds of thousands that were the 1860 Army, etc. The market was flooded with cap and ball revolvers. And so these guns were still being used well up until the 1900s because the guns were cheap and available. Ammunition was still available. The average guy in the field could still get cat's powder and had a mold. And so the guns were still utilized. It wasn't that you just draw a line and stopped. Production stopped, but the guns were still viable. Plus, and everybody said, well, if I was there in 1875, I'd want a Colt Single Action Army. Colt Single Action Army was the equivalent of 3 months' salary. One of these was a 1 week labor. You gonna buy one of these for 1 week's salary, or you gonna buy one of those for 3 months' labor? Plus the shells were not that common. Hard to get. This was everywhere at every outpost. So you can see how this stayed viable. Yeah, I want that. But just like today, in modern times, how many 1911s are still floating around? That's a century-old design with a century-old cartridge, a 45 ACP. And yet, how many of you have seen or fired one or even own one right now? It's still that common a gun 100 years later. So 100 years after that gun came out and that cartridge came out, we're still carrying that in day to day. Yes, there are much more modern guns floating around, right? More higher capacity, etc., but we're still carrying it. That was true of this as well. It was only whenever this stuff started really wearing out, I mean really wearing out, that those other guns became available, that these really got pushed to the rear and became more of a curiosity than an everyday carry. Okay, now enough of the history. Let's go to talking about the actual gun a little bit better, and let's look a little more in depth at the gun itself. Okay, here is the 51 Navy. And here is a replica of its chief competitor in that time period, which was the Whitney revolver. This one being a Spiller and Burr, but the two side and side are so close, just this will be a good representation. The Spiller and Burr was the Whitney revolver was the chief running competition at the time against the Colt. And it was really a distant second for several reasons. It had a top strap which made it stronger and etc. But the Colt was considered stronger and shot harder, and therefore had a better reputation as a man stopper and ending the fight with one shot. The Whitney was actually lighter and a little more compact, and so some went for that as a little bit more than the pocket gun, but I don't really need that big old huge belt gun, so they went with this. Okay. The Colt single action design, which is true of any of these designs, be it percussion revolver, is you simply pull back on the hammer, notice the trigger jumps, and it locks in place. The cylinder rotates and locks into position lined up relative to the barrel. The hammer face is now lined up with the percussion cap. Upon firing, bam, the round is fired out the barrel as usual. The cap should bust onto the nipple. Now, Colt was going for this for a reason. If you look inside the face of the Colt, there's a split right there, a groove cut down to the bottom. And early on I didn't understand why Colt was doing that. It seemed to be just a dumb idea to me, but then one day you really catch it. And what it is a lot of the percussion rifles of the day that we can think of, like the Hawken and etc. You read problems where the caps of the day were hard to come off. They would fire and the top would just disintegrate, leaving the donut stuck onto the nipple. And they would have to pry it off, especially if your hands were done greasy from loading, you couldn't grab it and pull it, and you'd have to take a knife and scrape it off of it. There was a gunsmith in Nebraska that had set up a place on the edge of a river and was working on a lot of guns from men working from these type of things. And he talked about one of the things he had to do was take the nipples out, replace nipples, make nipples, polish nipples, because the nipples would get rusty, would get beat up, and they'd grip the cap. Well, because of that, as Colt's developing this, Colt did not want you to have to fire and then have to take a pocket knife to get the caps off. So he made those cones and made it so that upon firing, the cap would split in that groove in the face of the hammer. The idea was it would split the bottom of the cap like it was a hollow donut like that. And then if you look right here, there's a slot in the back of the frame. When I take this out a minute, you're going to see it more clearly. Right here, there's a slot. That's basically the ejection port, so that the split cap should roll out here and then fall off out here. Did this work? Not every time. Chaos. The cap doesn't always do it. And over the years, the caps have changed. They were originally a very thin foil cap, and they've gotten harder and stronger over the years. And so some don't do that well. So a prominent cap problem is called cap jams. You would cock it, and those wings would pull the cap off. Rather than splitting it, they would actually grip the cap. And when you cocked it, it fell back, fell into this part of the action. When you went to pull the trigger, it wedged in there and smashed it flat, and that made it where the hammer didn't go far enough to fire the next cap. You got a cap jam, and you had to get it out. Some Colts are more prevalent to that than others. Sometimes it's a nipple problem. Sometimes it's those fangs on either side of that slot need to be rounded so they're not gripping the cap so much. But that will be under gunsmithing here in a minute. But that was a problem with the original guns. Not horrible, because you don't see it so much in the Civil War Journal about guys' guns having a problem of the caps jamming up and causing them all kinds of trouble. Or we'd see that in the Civil War reports about the weapon. There's a lot of praise for these guns, and so it should not have been that big a problem back then. It may be more of a modern problem with our modern caps or modern manufacture. We shall see. The cylinders of the 51 Navy had pins between each one so that the hammer could be put down, remember that slot, between the caps. So a fully loaded cylinder with 6 fully loaded and capped chambers would be indexed between 2, and then the hammer would be locked between. So it doesn't turn, and the hammer would be down on the frame of the cylinder itself. So it would be safe to carry with 6 in that day and time. Today we do not think such ways, and it's best to load 5 rounds and then empty and set the hammer down on the empty. That's the common practice today. If you want to do it where you want to carry it 6 and put it down between the 2, that's up to you. Has Blackie ever done that? Yes. Mostly in target situations where I'm at the range. If I'm going to be in any situation where I'm going to have a possibility of this gun getting cocked or whatever, I will always carry it hammer down on a dead chamber. Okay, that's for safety. The barrel. The barrels were octagonal. This follows the line of the rifles of that day, where octagonal was the by far more desirable shape of a barrel. They felt it made it stronger than a round barrel. So, and there can be some argument put forth for that, as the points of the flutes do add thicker material, so to speak, if you were looking at from the side, like stars or triangles sitting on a round to hold it and make it more rigid. There is something that can be made for that. The loading lever has a front latch on it. This was a great improvement over the Walker, which had a latch back here that it locked up into, and the Patterson, which also didn't seem to have much up there. which those latches come actually from the Patterson revolving rifles and shotguns. They had a metal hook back there, but that long barrel didn't whip. On the Walker, there's a lot of whip, and those drop down unless you modify them a little bit. And we'll get to that when we do a future video on the Walker. But with the modern percussion gun, this push back, pull down is what they brought out on the 51 Navy and was a big improvement. You have the wedge here, which allows to hold all three components together. This is the sacrificable part. Okay. And in straight up honesty, if you guys have followed my channel, you know that when I got this gun originally, this was an unfired 3rd generation Colt. And I got it from a gun dealer and brought it out to turn it into a shooter. And my first, I think it was 18 or 19 rounds that I fired through it, was a mild load. It was like 18 grains in it. And when I went to pop the barrel off, I couldn't get the barrel off of it because that wedge was dead soft, far softer than it should have been. And it, like a Lay's potato chip, it had waffled up, bent this way forward and sideways. I had to beat it out with a brass punch and replace the wedge on this. So if you get a signature series Colt, suspect the wedge. I recommend you go ahead and get another wedge because mine dead soft, and even such mild loads deform that wedge. But Colt intended for the wedge to be the replaceable part, because whenever we put it up there and put it together, notice that you've got pins down here at the bottom to align the barrel, and then it's just the slot in the arbor holding the cylinder. Well, if it was just that slot and just this pin, and the pin was hard, then all that abuse goes to the base pin, and that's harder to replace. So this was to be the replaceable part. So when you've done a lot of shooting, it would get a little loose, you'd replace the wedge. It was simple and easy and could be made by a blacksmith. But you could actually get a replacement Colt part. And we find that in the armorer's list of many of the military weapons, of them replacing the wedges after a couple of thousand rounds or several hundred, depending on the gun, that the wedge would get a little loose and they'd replace the wedge. So for your homework, I recommend you get replacement springs, replacement screws, and replacement wedge for your gun so that down the line you'll have it. Okay? Now, let's talk about proper timing for just a second. And this was the great innovation of Colt, that if you cock it very slowly and it fully locks up and it's lined up. If you cock it fast and it's fully locked up and lined up, you have a properly timed gun. So when you go looking to get yours and you want to know if it's not a Colt in a case that's never been turned and you're wanting to keep it as a collector, don't turn the cylinder. If you're looking for a shooter and it is not a never turn that the guy's going to freak out when you turn in the cylinder, then what you do is, like I said, take the gun, you want to rotate it at a normal speed, rotate it fast, does it lock up, rotate it very slowly, does it lock up. That tells you the lock works in proper position. Next, and this is something that is true of the 51 more than the others, and it is, especially with this Colt, this barrel is tapered. That means it's like a funnel, that it's bigger up here at the top than it is down here at the bottom. That this actual barrel part itself, forget the loading lever, but the actual barrel itself tapers. Well, the problem with that is when you go up here to shoot it and you cock it back and you're looking down the sights, because that end of the barrel is actually down, you've reduced the height of the front sight by that. And if you start deepening the notch, like I will talk about in a little bit in accurizing, etc., you get to the point that you drop down and the back of the barrel's in the way because the front sight is below, because it's so far downhill that if you start cutting this notch down, you actually get to the back of the barrel and you still ain't got low enough on the front sight. So that depends. Now, several of the replicas that are not Colt manufacturer the barrel isn't tapered or isn't tapered as severely. And that front sight seems therefore to be higher, and it does not shoot quite as high. Okay. But a true Colt that's truly tapered, that's something you got to be aware of. If you cock it and you put a straight edge all the way across here, you're going to see that the line goes and the barrel just drops away from it. And the top of the sight is about even with the back of the barrel when you're looking at it down the sight. So you get tempted after a while to put a notch in the back of the barrel, I'm telling you, and just line up that notch as opposed to the front sight, because it's about the same. I would not do it on this one, but I have had one like that. It was a truly tapered barrel, and it was a Pieta, I believe, from mid-80s manufacturer. And I actually marked it and put a notch in the top of the barrel right there. And what I would do is when I'd bring it up, I would align the front sight in that notch, and then the back notch. There was like 3 sights I lined up, and it was a very accurate shooter that way. But with this one, that hump in the back's a little bit high. And I've thought about it, but I don't want to have to refinish it. So that's why Blakey hasn't modified this one. The square back trigger guard. Beautiful addition to the gun to me. It really just makes the classic look. All the things really pop with it. A lot of people don't like it for shooting because whenever they're holding it like this, as you see, there's not a lot of room in here for your knuckle. And for some people, it's a little cramped. That's the reason Colt went to the round trigger guard, which kind of moved it forward in the space between the trigger guard and the trigger, kind of moves forward when you look at the round trigger guards as opposed to these square backs. They're a little bit small for our modern hands. I particularly like the look of it, and I have no problem with it. I have good friends that have real trouble trying to shoot one of these because of that. Next, and we're going to get into a full breakdown here in just a minute. We're going to go through where I'm talking about how you can accurize yours. But for the most part, most of them have a small grip, and this is true of all the 51 Navies. 51 Navy, 61 Navy, and later the Single Action Army use this grip, same size. In fact, you can take the grip frame off of a 51 Navy and it will put onto a Single Action Army, or should, they're supposed to. Okay. And as I mentioned earlier in another video, for people with great big bow hunking hands, I have taken the grip off of an 1860, which will also bolt on, and put that onto a Single Action Army or onto a 51 Navy or whatever for a friend, because he has these big bear paw hands and he needs a big grip to be comfortable. And so that might be something you need to do down the line. Okay, now let's go back to my shop and we're going to do a detailed breakdown of the 51 Navy. I'm going to show you how to take apart every screw on it, and as we do, we're going to talk about accurizing the gun, of tips and tricks and things that will make improvements to the gun. Okay, let's do that. Okay guys, now I've got my 51 Navy right here, and let's do a detail strip. Now this gun is dirty because I've just done the shooting you're going to see in the rest of this video, but I'm going to be cleaning it. But I want to show you it dirty because I want to show you the pattern of where the fouling goes, as well as tips and tricks to accurize and etc. as we go along. First, let's talk about what you're going to need to maintain such a gun. Well, one, for cleaning, what I like to use is one of these cheap plastic tubs. It's better than doing it in the kitchen sink. Take this, put some warm tap water in it, a little bit of dish soap, and be able to completely submerge the parts in it and clean it in here, and then rinse it off with clean tap water once you get all the stuff out of it. This is the best way that I know to clean one, to keep one handy. And I use just hot tap water and Dawn dishwashing liquid to clean mine when I'm doing a detail clean at home. You'll also going to need some paper towels. The blue ones are better for scrubbing and like getting into the nooks and crannies. Standard paper towels are fine, but I like the blue ones. Some pipe cleaners. Any place that sells pipe tobacco is going to have this, and a lot of times you can also find them in the craft section of stores. These are great for getting in the nooks and crannies, and we'll be using those in just a minute. I like boar butter or some natural lube like you know, unsalted Crisco, bore butter, whatever, for actually lubing the chambers and the bore, because I do not want to use petroleum-based oil there, because when it burns with black powder, it forms a hard fouling. I can use petroleum-based like gun oil on the outside, but in the gun bore and the cylinders, I do not. I use bore butter. One of these cleaning attachments, and I like to use just simply a wire brush. Now this one has been used many times, as you can tell, but a black nylon or a brass brush. This one happens to come with a wire handle on it. You can pick them up at gun shows a lot, or order them online, or just simply a small cleaning rod that fits the bore. A supply material to make patches out of. This is just an old shirt I tore up, made into patch material. One of the small parts bowls is very handy for keeping up with all your small parts. Finally, a rag with gun oil. Now I use Remington oil, but you can use whatever kind of oil you like, and this again is for the outside of the gun, not inside the bore, but that's what I wipe down and keep rust preventative with. And then most important, you need a properly fitted screwdriver. Now you can simply go get some precision screwdrivers that are used for electronics and stuff that are big enough for this job, and just look for precision screwdrivers, or simply buy, like I did, they're relatively cheap, a set of gunsmithing screwdriver tips for using on your guns. This will keep you from bugging up the screw slots and stuff, and it's well worth the investment. So let us start with the gun. Again, the gun is dirty. So, we're going to start by breaking it down. Take your thumbnail and you press the spring on the top of the wedge. Push it down to go past the latch, and then push in. It should pop in. If it does not, and you need something to tap it in, a wooden clothespin taken in half, just one side, makes a good wedge driver. You can tap if you got a really tight wedge. Mine is loose enough I can actually slide it and pull it out. That spring that you see that pops up on it is actually supposed to lock underneath that screw right there and keep the wedge captured so it doesn't fall out when you take it apart in the field. Okay? So we're going to now separate the barrel off. The wedge is out of the way, and we wiggle, and out comes the barrel. We'll set that to the side for the moment. Now pull back the hammer and rotate, and out comes the cylinder. I've still got a spent cap on this one. I'll get rid of that right now. There's another spent cap, part of a spent cap, and we're good. Okay, the face of the cylinder builds up quite a bit of fouling. The base pin right here and the frame right there, I think you can possibly see that. Let me get a little bit more light on it. Maybe you can see it better. See how dark it is right here at the end? It's like a band. That's fouling. That will actually bind up your cylinder. So in the field, when I'm going to just clean this in the field, between, let's say I've shot a string of like 3 cylinders and I just want to knock the extra fouling in, that's when such a small brush is good. Now you want to take just a small patch, and I use just the bristle brush, and this is like a 38 type special bristle brush, because I can put the patch over it and these bristles will grip the patch, so don't lose it easy. So I'm just going to take the bristle brush dry and run it up and down the bore. And that will knock any hard fouling loose, or it should. Now notice I'm running the patch from the brush from the breech to the muzzle. I don't want to wear my muzzle, so if I've got a steel rod, I don't want to be running it up and down cleaning from the muzzle, because I can damage the crown of the barrel. So I want to go from the breech toward the front. Okay? Now looking through that, that's fairly clear. I can now take and put the patch over the end and taking the rod. Now it'll be tight. I want to push it all the way to the end. I'm going to pull it off, pull it back through. Even though I've shot probably 30 rounds through it, that's what just came out after the brushing. You know, yes, it's dirty, but it's not horrible. Now, taking a patch, putting it on the tip of your finger, and do the forcing cone in the back of the barrel. Now, the forcing cone, which is this part right here at the back of the barrel, this part, this takes up the space to the front of the cylinder. In the 1860 Army, this is much shorter, but in the 51 Navy and the 36s, it's longer to take up this space. The inside of this should be smooth and polished. A lot of times when you buy them, they are not. They're rough. And so something that you can do yourself is you can simply take a little bit of fine sandpaper, like 600 grit or something like that, and just put it on your fingertip and bear down and twist. Don't overdo it. You just want to twist it a little bit and take any wire or sharp edge off of that. You can also take a cleaning brush and put a little bit of steel wool on the end and just sit here and turn it. You don't want to take off a lot of metal. You just want to polish it so that it's a smooth transition where the ball jumps from the cylinder into the back of the barrel and then proceeds down. Okay, let us start with the breakdown of the barrel. I like to remove the wedge. If the wedge will come out by pulling it, great, and mine will. If not, you will have to take that screw out to get it out. Next, unlock it, and you want to remove this screw right here that holds the loading lever in place. Now retrieve it. Now, here on the loading lever, on the rammer part of it, you want to make sure you don't get a big buildup of soot or whatever, because it will bind it up and it can cause you problems. Most of these are color case hardened because they've been hardened to help prevent it from rusting and to make it more durable. And notice how it's got a good deal of slop. There's a slot inside of that rammer to allow it to do that. This screw where the rammer attaches to the ramrod, to the lever, should be snug and tight. Not so tight this can't move, but it should be good and tight. On some, you're going to find this screw comes loose easy. If you've got a screw like this that you want to hold in place a little bit better and you don't want to invest in the fancy stuff, if you got some of your wife's clear fingernail polish, simply put a drop of it on the end of it and screw it in. That will do the job because it'll then hold it in place better. So clear fingernail polish is your friend. Alright, clean out the end of the rammer, and I have a cone-shaped rammer. So take the end of your cleaning rod and go around and break up any fouling or whatever, and kind of pack a little bit of patch in there and give her a good wipe down. Because this is going to, a cone shaped like this of a Uberti will take conicals better and not distort the head. A lot of the Pietas are flat across this and will just mash it flat, but this one's got a cone in it, so clean out that cone. Okay. Now, in here, where the lever runs, take a couple of those pipe cleaners, fold it around a patch, using it for like a shape, and get in there and clean those corners out. Because what happens sometimes is this rusts up in here, and it makes it hard to work the ramrod. And the ramrod can, over time, if you don't take care of this, rust in place and make it very difficult to utilize it. Similarly, in here where the rammer goes, give it a good clean. Make sure that it's not building up lead or fouling right in there, because remember, that's right down from the fire. So the flash of each shot is going to the bottom of this. And so you want to clean it up so it doesn't bind up your loading lever. Okay? Consequently, give that loading ramp a good push. Go across right there. The face right here, and take the end of that pipe cleaner and go into those openings where the alignment pins go. Make sure they're not going to rust closed because of it. Now when we go to oil in a minute, we're going to make sure we put oil in there. Now at this part, I would clean the bore, which would be up and down inside the water. I'm going to forego that because you understand what I'm saying, but that's how I would break down and clean my barrel. I would therefore, when I go back to close it up, I would put a drop of oil here onto the end of the loading lever, and if you'll look, there's a shiny spot. That's where it's wearing. That tells me that the edge right here is a little bit sharp. I may want to take a little file and round that a little bit, just so it's not digging in and cutting a groove. Anything that creates friction is a bad thing to us. I'll put a little drop of oil right there at the junction. Work that and make sure the oil gets down in there. Put a little drop of oil right here on the pin and where it would function. Put it back up into that slot. Put a drop of oil. And I'm going to drop in that pin, making sure it goes all the way across. Now you see how I'm putting my thumb up there? I lay the screwdriver tip on that. Keeps me from jumping all over the place and scratching up my face of my gun. Just like that. Run her down. Make sure she's good and snug. And you see what I didn't do right? I didn't put that back. That's what you get when you try to do stuff on camera. But Blackie is human just like you are. We all make mistakes. So, take and put plunger in. Now, tip it up in there. Put in the screw. Looking through the hole, you'll see if it's lining up properly. There we go. Alright, now. I'm using that finger to guide that screwdriver tip so it isn't jumping out of slot and scratching up my gun. Okay. Go ahead and grab that screw where you have the wedge lock. Break it loose and then tighten it back down. That keeps it from freezing in place. If you go to take it loose and it feels like go ahead and take it out and put a drop of oil on it. Fouling's got in there. Clean it up. If you can break it loose and put it back, do it. It means it's broke free. Now the wedge. The wedge is going to be wiped down real good, clean. These should be hardened. And you want to inspect your wedge at this time. Now, what we mean by inspect the wedge. Look at the edge of it. Remember, this is being hammered by those two forces. Is it raising up a burr or whatever on the side? Run your finger along that edge. Has it pushed up a burr? You may want to take a file and square it off if it does. What can happen is if a wedge is battering up, it's called, and you put the gun together and you go do a big long shooting session where you shot 200 rounds and you get home and you can't take the wedge out because the wedge actually battered and the edges formed sharp edges and went up and have dug into the metal. Now when you try to beat it apart, you're actually digging the sharp edge into the arbor trying to pull it out. We'll get to the arbor in a minute about the same thing. But along the four edges of the wedge can be a sharp edge. Feel it. If it is, take a file and go ahead and round it off now. It'll make your life a whole lot easier in the long run. And remember, get replacement wedges because this is the sacrificable part. Now, hook it in, put it in place, pull it out, have it hanging right there. Now, like I said, I would completely clean inside and out. I'm going to take my oily rag with gun oil on it, and I'm going to wipe off every part of the barrel on the outside, especially the muzzle. Take your finger and put on the tip of the muzzle and around like that. Does it feel a sudden sharp burr? Has anything caused a burr? Get rid of it if there is one, and I don't. Okay? Wipe down, ready to go. Alright, that moves over here to the side. Now, cylinder. Cylinder would be submerged into water. We're not going to do that right now. And we'd clean them. In the field, I would simply take my brush, holding the cylinder in my hand, I'd do this. Do it 3 or 4 turns, rotate. 3 or 4 turns, rotate. Like that. Go around and knock off any of the sharp stuff. Any of the fouling inside. Making sure to get it all the way into the bottom. I want to be on that cylinder face against that inside of that nipple, so that wire tip is actually going up against that nipple on the inside, scrubbing it. And go across the face just a little bit. Break any fouling free. What I do, and I mentioned this in the shooting, I believe, is when I get done with the long string, I'll put my finger up there and rotate the cylinder. to wipe that cylinder face. You see I got quite a bit out of it. Okay. And oftentimes the faces of these cylinders have got round grooves in them. And that's from where the milling process, when they create it. Well, them milling marks hold fouling, and it makes where the gun wants to jam up faster. So I like to go out of my way and clean them off as much as possible. Make sure my cylinder face is true and slick. Now your chamber mouths, I like to bevel them a little bit, because when I go to ram the ball, I want it to swedge it rather than cutting it so much. It's still going to cut a ring, but I don't want a jagged edge there because it may cut off too much. So a way to do it is I simply take a piece of sandpaper and put it on a fingertip, and we want really fine sandpaper, 400, 500, 600 grit. Put it on a fingertip and just put your fingertip up there and do that. Rotate, go around, one each time, and just make sure there's no real sharp edge. I want it to swedge it in there, push it in there, and force it. Think like a foot going into a sock, as opposed to just cutting it off and leaving a jagged edge. Okay? The center axis pin, same thing. Give her a little spin up in there. Clean her up. Fouling can build up in there. And so we want to do what we can to limit that. Now, back here on the back, taking your wire brush, go across the tops, which is up against the star and across over the tops of the nipple. Get that fouling that builds up around there. If you do that, now go back the other way and go into the actual ratchets. Make sure there's no buildup of fouling in the ratchet itself. And this is a brass brush, so it's not going to hurt this. Brass is so much softer than steel that it doesn't, steel will damage it before it gets damaged by it. Now, taking a pipe cleaner, fold it in half, make a little loop, and I like to go in behind the nipple, just like that, and clean out around the back of the nipple. Then put that loop over the nipple itself, just sit it down over it like a noose, and kind of wiggle side to side. That cleans the back base of that nipple and gets the crud off of it. Now I've got Amco nipples in this one. I like Amco better than I do Slick Shot. That's just a personal preference. Many people really enjoy the Slick Shots. Now whenever your pipe cleaner gets a little fuzzy like that, open it up, go to a new place, bend it, and do it again. Okay? And Amcos are tougher material, and I like the design of the chamber that they create better. Many of the stock nipples are adequate, but if you're having a whole lot of cap jam problems, and in my video that I will put a link to right here, when I did a detailed accurizing of a single action revolver, it will be the same ideas for this one that I used on that gun. We'll work on this gun. Go look at it and do, like I said, about dehorning, getting rid of all the burrs, etc. Go through the entire action and make sure that it's good to go. Then, if that has not cured the problem, then swap nipples. Okay? Alright, now that I've gone all the way around and cleaned out, I take the end of one of the pipe cleaners and actually insert it into the nipple itself. It will go inside. Give it a little twist back and forth. Clean the inside of the nipple. Now you're going to get eventually, there are going to be times you're going to foul out a nipple. And what that means in English is fouling gets inside the nipple for whatever reason, and you need to clean it out. A opened up, small diameter paper clip can go inside and actually clean out the flash hole inside. Okay, that's got the back end cleared up. Now, of course, I would have cleaned this in water at this time, submerged it in water, cleaned out all the chambers, let it dry, rinsed it in running water, sat there and let it dry, and then go back through it, detail oil it, and clean it. Now, all I'm going to do in detail oiling is the exterior of it. I'm going to take my oily rag and I'm going to clean the exterior, making sure to put a coat of oil on it. to cover all surfaces. Now, counterintuitive, don't get the nipples wet with oil. So you just want to do it like this and do it on the surface. So I like to hold it like that and just kind of do this action and go around and oil. And then back here on the back, I just kind of dab a little with my fingers, staying off the actual nipples. If you put oil on the nipples, it's going to contaminate, and therefore when I put a cap on it, it's going to make it want to go bang. Now, a lot of the target shooters and a lot of the stuff talked about firing caps because they didn't want the nipples could be oiled and they didn't want it to be fouled out. So what you want to do is you want to take your time to clean it up by not oiling. Don't put oil directly on the nipple. You can fire caps to clean it if you want to, but I have not done that a lot. I don't like to waste caps no more than I have to. And before I go to load, a lot of times I'll hold up the cylinder and hold it up against a bright light, looking through the hole to make sure I can see that dot. You know, always rotate the cylinder because the nipple channel is not straight. It's actually angled. So if I'm holding it like this way to a bright light, it may be at the wrong angle for the light to get in. So I always rotate it. Make sure you see a light at the end of that tunnel, so to speak. And that means my flash holes are clear. I can load it. Okay? Now, we come to the big one. Breaking down the action. Now in the field, let's talk about this. I have just shot a string and I'm wanting to touch it up in the field, and I pull it apart. I take my cleaning rod. Here at the front of the frame on the inside, I want to break up that fouling because that fouling will bind up my cylinder. Alright? On the base pin there's a series of grooves. These are to hold grease. Okay? And then here in the front on this cold, some do, some don't, there's a recessed area. It's a little smaller in diameter. Okay, that's to make like a shelf so that when the cylinder is on there, the actual diameter right there is very tight, and that there's a place there for fouling to go in front of the cylinder and not in and underneath the cylinder. Okay. Now remember I told you about the corners raising up on the wedge, the opening here for the wedge slot. You want to feel those. These will quite often batter and form like teeth. And what it is that sharp edge will get battered in firing and want to roll outward. And you'll make it where it won't go into the barrel slot. Because once it gets in here, if it rolls out in there, it's kind of trapped inside the barrel. And it makes it very hard to get the barrel off. If not, have to beat it off. So, right here, feel of that. If there's a very sharp edge, take a light file or some sandpaper. Don't take off a lot of metal. Just simply take off that sharp edge to keep that lip from rolling. It's like, think like the edge of a knife rolling. If you keep that relatively smooth, you're going to be in a good shape. Now, all I would do in the field, if I was doing it at a range or something like that, is like this. You'd see, I'd wipe it off, get the fouling off of the base plate down here. I would wipe off the back. I would wipe off my base pin, and then I would re-lubricate my base pin. I would put my cylinder up there, and I would spin my cylinder as I went back. When I got it up there and it was almost ready to touch, I would pull it out, and if there was a big old glob of lube where I lube my base pin on the ratchet, I would wipe that off. Okay, I want my inside well lubricated, but I do not want a big glob up here to be forced back in that hole back here because it will gum up the action. Okay? So, I want it to rotate and click in normal. I want to put my barrel back on, making sure this base pin, and then make sure my wedge, I put a little bit of lube on that wedge when I go to push it into this slot. Make sure you put a little lube into that slot. You want it kind of wet with lube so that it will not ever freeze or stick in that position. Okay? Now, let's break down. The breakdown begins by, we put the hammer all the way down. Turn the gun upside down. Here in the base of the screw is our first screw. I'm going to take that screw, put my thumb up there to act as a rest, remember. And I'm going to sit there and I'm going to turn and unscrew that screw about halfway. Now what's happening is this. There's a tension, like a pair of scissors, between these screw holes and this, and it's meant to hold it tight. Well, there's a tension there. If I just go to unscrewing these screws, as they get down to the end of the thread, they want to pop up, and that wears these screws out quickly. And we're going to be breaking this thing down a lot over the course of its life. So I don't want to do that. I don't want to wear out those screws. So I want to take some tension off by loosening that. I just take it out like half, 2 turns. Now I come up here to these screws. Now the tension has been removed. And I can sit and spin these out. Now these frame screws, here, 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 and here are the same size. So these 4 interchange. Unscrew that. Take that out. Now I flip it back over, and that little thing that holds the screws, you see, trust me, this is well worth $1.50 at some discount store to keep your screws from getting lost. Now take out that remaining screw on the base. Now that screw is unique to this part of the gun. There is nothing else on the gun that will replace that one. They look similar to these screws, but there is actually a difference on most of them. Some are the same in the cheaper models. Pull, and off comes the grip. Okay, just look inside, make sure there ain't no fouling, nothing splitting, whatever. You can be a good time to put a coat of furniture polish or something, or whatever, wax, whatever you're doing to preserve your grip onto that. Now, I like to take that base of the grip screw and go ahead and put it back into position, because I don't want to lose it, and it's kind of unique. It goes back there, so keep it from getting mixed up. I go there. Now, the big mainspring screw right here. Put your frame down on the deck, hold it. I put the slide up there, and I want to turn it. My finger is holding the spring in place, okay? Turn it about 2 full turns, maybe 3, okay? Now I want to take my thumb, I want to press down and slide the spring to the side, just like that. Now all the tension's off that spring. If I just take the screw out, it goes ping! I run the risk of damaging the thread, or somehow that sudden release of power could cause that spring to snap. But by thumb doing that, now the spring, as you can see, is loose. Now I unscrew it the rest of the way with my finger, and I take the mainspring, put it in the thing, and I put that mainspring screw back into position, just like that. Just thumb tight it. Now, turning it upside down, I want to come up here, put my thumb up there, remember, and I'm going to take the screw up on the front of the trigger guard, and I'm going to unscrew it. Taking it off, put it right there. Now I take the screws on the back here. Now, your screws can come loose over time in firing. And so it's a good idea to always have in your kit somewhere a small screwdriver. Remember, these 4 are the same, so I can put them over there. In your kit to be able to tighten these up in the field. I usually about every, if I'm at the range, about every 5 or 6 cylinder fulls, I'll give a quick check and just make sure nothing's come loose. Okay, that's all the base screws, and now I'm holding it in my hand. You see that's fouling right here? It's made it all the way down to the trigger guard area from above. And this is the cold, which has been silver plated. And you can see the silver plate is not holding up that great. That's one of the reasons that I think the original owner got rid of it, because it hadn't been fired, but I guess the plating was giving it up. And it's just a piece of brass. It's a piece of brass that's been silver plated. Okay, now that front screw came out of that frame. It's unique. Put it back. Now we're looking inside the action, and you can see this action is dirty. Okay. Here you see a large screw inside the action. It's holding the trigger spring right there. Putting my thumb across there, resting it up there, I'll put it in there and unscrew this. Now this is one of the most misunderstood springs in the gun. One of the most subject to breakage. And there is the spring, and there is that unique screw. I'm going to put that screw there. It's big head, you can tell it's different from everything else. And now I'm going to wipe down this spring to clean it off a little bit. Now, let us look at this a second. You have one long leg, one short leg. The long leg goes to the trigger. The short leg goes to the bolt, which goes up and down and locks the cylinder. There is an up and a down for this spring. Notice the curve. Let's see if I can lay that down and get you a better shot of that. See, it curves up or it curves down. The spring should go into position curved down. Here inside the frame, there's a shelf right there. Excuse me. There's a shelf right there that screw hook's hooked to it. How deep that is can affect that spring, because if it is just a couple of thousandths too deep, if I over tighten that spring, it wants to snap because I'm bending the spring too hard. So when you put that spring back in, do just enough tension to make it work. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Too much and you're stressing that spring too much. Now, take the trigger screw out next. It's the lower of the two toward the bottom of the frame. And it's simply a cross spring. Cross screw. These two are interchangeable. So there is the actual spring. Again, it's dirty because I've been shooting quite a bit. And that fouling has made it all the way down in there. This spring should be hardened, not a guarantee, but it should be. Now out comes the trigger. Take the trigger. Again, the trigger should be hardened, not a guarantee. And wipe it down. Clean it off. Any fouling, any signs of rust, take a wire brush and knock off all of that off of it. You want it as clean as you can get it. Okay? Now, the next one, screw right there, and this is the bolt spring. Bolt screw. Or cylinder lock. There's several names, but it's really the bolt. And that comes out. There's the bolt. Again, very dirty. Give me a paper towel. All this stuff's going to get a good thorough cleaning here in a minute. That trigger spring, the trigger screw and the bolt screw are the same screw, so they're interchangeable. Okay. Now wipe off the excess. Now we have the hammer screw right there. Break it loose. Pull it out. It's unique, but it's so big you can't mistake it for anything else. Now, taking the hammer, this is important, lift back and then slide straight down, because the hand comes out. The hand rises and slot. Now see how dirty this is? That's just after about 100 rounds of shooting. It will gum up this way because the Colt designs are kind of airy and they need to be broken down after a big shooting match, or if I'm going to be putting it up. Now if you're going to be shooting this and then tomorrow I'm going to go shoot it again, or Tuesday I'm going to shoot it again, then no, you ain't got to break it down this far. But if I'm going to be putting it up for any kind of storage, yes, go ahead and fully break it down. Now there is the hammer. Again, take that brush in any hard packs of filing. Now you notice the face right here. You can see all that black fouling. This is one of the things about the Colt. That when the Colt is in position like that and it fires, the hammer will actually rock back just a touch, because a lot of times our modern springs are not as strong as the old original spring, because we don't like such a hard cock. We want it to be less, it looks so cool to just like that. We don't want cock it. Well, a heavy spring is actually better for the gun because it holds this tight. And upon firing, that pressure is coming back out of that nipple and it wants to come back, and that hammer rocks back. When that hammer rocks back, remember that slot right there we talked about earlier? All that fouling blows down this ramp and blows straight in through there into the action down here. Woof! And you wonder why the springs break? They can be rusted in place. There can be all kinds of reasons why you think the gun's good and then you go to cock it and something snaps. It's because it was rusted in place. So at the range, I would cock the hammer back and I would take and I would clean out in here, because this can actually build up to the point that it will hurt your ignition, because it's actually landing on fouling instead of landing on metal. It's so tight in here, it'll actually land on the fouling like landing on a pillow. Even with this wire brush right now, some of this ain't wanting to come off. This is a hardened, case hardened part, and I'm having to scrub like that with a wire brush to get it to come off. That's how it becomes hard and caked in there. Now this again is an extreme case. This gun's been fired at about 120, 130 rounds. So in the field, I might have to do this even if I was hunting. Have to break one down and clean it, because it could get so dirty and foul just for many different things. If the openings in the nipple have gotten too big, this can cause this to have that problem. Okay, now that is completely broken down. Now, what do I need to do with the frame? I need to take a cleaning rod. I need to grab me a new patch for this. I need to take me an oily patch, and I need to run it inside the frame to try to get out any fouling and any rusty spots or whatever in there. Better yet, take some spray oil and spray into it, and that will make it a much better job in it. Okay. Now what I've done is I've taken my little tub and I put a piece of aluminum foil in it. And use some sort of good oil. I'm using like either penetrating oil or something like Ballistol. A lot of guys like Ballistol for this job. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take them parts and I'm going to put them in here. I'm going to give everything a bath right quick, including the frame. And notice I got a old toothbrush, perfect for this type of job. So I'm just going to give them a good spray down with a good penetrating oil of some kind. Get into all them nooks and crannies. So now we take it. Make sure we're fully in the zone here. I'm going to take that toothbrush and I'm going to scrub all them nooks and crannies I can reach with that oil. Especially in here where the hammer goes. Okay? Clean that up. Run your base pin and run the frame right there. I like something like PB Blaster for this. It does a really good job. It's almost basically like diesel fuel. And it gets in here and it dissolves a lot of the fouling, and it really inhibits a lot of rust, especially for a gun I'm going to be putting up for a long time. Give her a good wipe down. Get all the fouling off. Hammer especially. Get in. A hammer is kind of complicated because there's a lot of nooks and crannies on a hammer. On the faces, the facets. Here on the round part of the hammer, you have part you're familiar with. And then you have a bevel. This is what actually does the camming of the bolt. And then coming down the face, the first notch is a big deep notch. That's your half cock notch. And then past that, there's a real narrow little notch. That's your full cock notch. So make sure to go across that full cock notch and make sure it ain't fouling in that notch. A lot of times a hair trigger is simply rust gets into that notch and makes it where it does not want to engage properly. Alright, now making sure everything is good and wiped down and cleaned. Bolt. Toothbrush is great for this with a little bit of this oil for getting into them little nooks and crannies. Of course, PB Blaster or Baristol works just as good for this. On your mainspring up here at the top of the mainspring, a lot of times you'll get fouling built up because of where that pressure is rolling down the hammer face into the frame. Now, take I got one right here. Take one of your pipe cleaners, double it in half. Looking on the inside of the frame, there's a slot to one side. This is the slot that the hand actually runs in and comes out up here where it engages the back of the there's a slot right here at the base pin. That's where it engages the back of the cylinder and turns it. The hand is actually doing like that and shoving it. You want to run up and down inside that slot, make sure that oil gets all the way up in there and clean out any fouling. Once you take it, bend it again, make a new working surface. Okay? Go in here and go around the base pin where it joins the frame. So here's the base pin, here's the frame. Go around on the inside. That's the race where the ratchet goes around so the hand can turn it. And quite often this will get gunked up with all kinds of lube or whatever like we talked about. Always keep it lubricated, but don't overdo it. Okay. Now that we've given that a good bath, we're going to move it over to the side. We're going to bring our parts tin back out here. We're going to take our drying rag and we're going to take apart, for in this case the hammer. We're going to go along and we're going to thoroughly wipe down and clean, get off any excess oil and make sure it's clean. I like to do these oil baths for the internal parts, and it makes a big difference to me. It treats it, it seems to. It's also the time now when I angle it and I can see any fouling or rust, like right there. I got a little hard spot of it. And that's the time to actually take that wire brush now and get it off. It got it off. That oil has penetrated and softened it. On the back of the face of the hammer there's a teeny little roller. Take your finger and make sure that roller runs. It actually sits on the top of the main spring. Make sure that roller functions. Sometimes they'll get glued shut, so to speak. Alright, now, remember your pipe cleaner? That slot in the face of the hammer where the safety notch is and where it goes under the caps. Clean out that notch. You want to also deburr that notch. Make sure there's no fouling in it or anything like that, because that makes it suck caps off worse and therefore causes more problems. Make sure that hammer face is nice and clean so that you're not going to have a problem with it impacting softly because of the fouling. Make sure your hammer notch where the rear sight is clean. Take your thumbnail, run through it, make sure it's clean. Okay, set her down. Next one, this is the trigger. Make sure that it's fully clean and that there is no fouling on it. Okay, let me get all the parts now wiped down and make sure all the little nooks and crannies are clean, and then I'll bring you back and we'll do the assembly process. Now you notice how I took my bowl, I normally wash my parts in, and I just put a piece of aluminum foil in it and I sprayed the oil in here. That way the oil is captured and is placed. Now I've cleaned and lubed and wiped all the parts clean. I can take that paper towel, stick it right there and kind of absorb up some of that oil. Roll the aluminum foil up. And got something I can throw in the garbage and not make a mess. Lessons learned. Now, we're ready to reassemble. All my parts have been lubed and set up. Okay? Now, starting with my frame, I have simply wiped off all of the excess oil but left the coating of oil on here. I will do my base plate and all here in a minute with natural lube so I don't cause a problem in burning. Put down a clean paper towel or something on top. That way you should be able to see the contrast a little bit easier. Alright, starting with the frame, the first thing I'm going to put in is the hammer. So I take my hammer, I take the hand, I put the hand into the slot, holding it with my thumb, and I take the frame and I'm going to go up, I'm going to push the spring in, go that way, and then slide it into the slot. Once it gets in there, I'm going to take and kind of wiggle just a little bit. Wiggle the hammer and wiggle it up into position, and then look through the hole where the hammer spring goes. The hammer bolt goes. There's the hammer bolt. I go in there, take my thumb up there as the rest, put the screwdriver into the slot and tighten that up. This wants to be really snug. Since I sprayed lube, I know that the bottom of those screw threads have got lube and they're not going to rust that screw shut. Now, make sure it operates smooth and clean. Okay? Now, rotating to the inside, I'm going to take the bolt. I'm going to take the ears, the rabbit ears of the bolt, and I'm going to slide them in first, and then I'm going to rotate the bolt up into position. Then, from this side of the frame, I'm going to take the bolt screw, start it in, looking through the bottom, push down and line that hole up. So it goes all the way through and engages on the far side into this side. Sometimes you got to move the hammer out of the way to get out those rabbit ears to fit in the right place. Put my thumb up there as the rest, go into the screw slot, and begin turning. Snug it down good and snug. Now, rotate hammer up, push it down with my finger. Now, the trigger. I want to take the trigger, angle it in like this into the frame, and rotate it into position. Again, taking the trigger screw, putting it in, wiggling it so it goes all the way across, put my thumb up there as the guide, and put the screwdriver on there. This keeps me from doing this and scratching up my frame. I see that a lot. Alright, once you get in there, give it a good nug. Now, make sure everything's working. With your finger, hold the trigger forward and pull back on the hammer. Click, click, that's in position. Now, push the trigger back and let it down. That tells me that everything is in position. Okay. Now, the trigger spring, bolt spring, and that big screw that goes there in the top of the slot. I want to put the spring curved down, put the long leg onto the base of the trigger step, and set it in position. You do run the risk of locking it underneath if it's just a touch short, and then the trigger's bound. It's supposed to be on top of the trigger, not under the trigger, and it can be underneath that shelf. So sit it on the shelf and lean it in position. Now take the big screw and put it up there. Again, using my thumb as a guide, I get onto it and turn it till it starts in. Now gently run it down until you feel it tension up a little bit. Now when it tensions up a little bit, stop. Now pull the hammer back, click, click. Alright, that locked in position. but the bolt is not up in the window. That means there's not enough tension on that screw. I want to do just enough tension to make everything work. So I'm going to pull back on it. Okay. Now I'm going to tension that screw more. Bring it on down a little bit. I look in the window and see that the bolt is sticking up into the actual frame. Now I pull back one click. See if that trigger moves. It does. It locks in position. Pull it back one more time. Now the bolt popped up inside and the trigger is locked. That means I got enough tension. I don't have to keep torquing that screw down. If I over torque that screw, it's working the spring. You know, it's like right here is anchored and it breaks. So this is how you limit a lot of the breakage on it, and that was made that way for a reason. It was so that the spring, as it lost strength over time, you could tighten up that screw a little bit more. Now I've got it in position and the slot is diagonal like 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock. I'm going to give it just a grunt more like 8:30 to 2:30, and that will be, in my mind, the position that screw slot should be in when I put it back in. Okay? But again, how do I know it's in the right position? Everything's down, trigger's in place, the bolt is sticking up inside the frame. I pull it back, click, click, it's now at full cock, the bolt is popped back up, I push the trigger back and the hammer goes up. Everything's in position. I don't need the mainspring to tell me that. Okay, speaking of mainspring, now I take the trigger guard, I remove that unique screw from the front, put it down, I'm going to set the trigger guard in place, I'm going to line up, and I'm going to put that unique screw back in there, but just loosely. I want to put a lot of tension on it right now, I just want to get it started good. And there. Okay, I got it started. Now the frame's still loose. Now I take one of my frame screws, drop it into position. Take the other one on the other side, drop it into position. Come up here and use my finger as a guide. Go into that one. And I'm going to run it a couple of turns down to make sure it's engaged. Jump to the other side. Run it a couple of turns down. Make sure it's engaged. Now, I want to loosely run the two base screws down before I tighten this up, okay? Give the frame a little wiggle, make sure everything's lined up good, and now I run that front one down till it's snug. Then I jump back to the two frame screws and tighten them down to make sure that they're now good and snug. Give it a good snug up, okay? Because these will work loose as the frame and the grip and everything torques. Okay, everything's in position. Now, taking the mainspring screw loose, like that. I'm going to put a drop of oil in that hole because I never want that to freeze up where it can't come out. Now I'm going to line up there with my mainspring. I'm going to put the screw in. Just like that. Get it started. Some of these are a fiddly thing to get started, and this one is. You just don't want to line up right. You think you're in it, you think, man, this has got to be it, and you'll turn and turn, and it just never seems to start. It's not stripped out, it's just there's no lead at the top. I need to bevel that hole to make it easier to get started. It's just too, it's got to be so precisely lined up on mine. On others I've seen where near about falls in. Alright, then I got it in there. Now it's starting. Now with that still loose, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to put it right beside it, and I'm going to run it down by hand until there's just a tiny little gap between the head of that screw and that spring. Okay? Now I take my thumb, I'm going to press it down and go underneath the hammer. Excuse me. Press it down and go underneath the hammer. Just like that. Now it's in position. Making sure that that roller on the hammer is in that little raceway in the top of the spring. So just wiggle, wiggle, make sure they're lined up. Now I come back with my screwdriver, and now I slowly, don't be in a hurry, let the spring flex, because you're loading that spring now, see. If you just bear down all at once with no chance for the spring to move, if it binds, it might crack. Okay, it's in position. Now make sure it's fully seated in position. Now I gently cock the hammer. First click, it locked. The bolt is down like it's supposed to be. Full cock. Excuse me. Full cock all the way back. See how little of a gap there is of that spring? Right there, it's almost laying on the frame. Trigger is then locked in place and the bolt is up. Now I pull the trigger, everything rolls. Okay, we're now good. Now we're going to put the grip frame back on. We unscrew that unique bolt, lay it down, take the grip. I've come in at the base. Don't torque, you'll break your grip right there. It's just wood. Line it up and then push the wood up and onto like that so it starts. Then you want to lean it in. Okay, now turning it this way, you want to squeeze in and look in the hole until this hole lines up. Now I want to start it up there and just by hand get it started. That's it. Again, this can be the fiddly part. Don't let it cross thread. Remember, there's a tension between these two holes. So sometimes it's a little fiddly to get this thing to line up. Okay, just get it started. Don't spin it on up. Now, move to the top and push forward. This should line up. It's not too low, too high. Okay, drop in one of your top of your frame screws. See if it goes in the hole. Now, mine, if this tension is too loose, it wants to cock downhill and it's too short. So you put it up there and you kind of push up on it till the hole lines up. When the hole lines up, and I use this hole to guide me for the hole of the screw I'm actually putting in. Now I'm going to sit it up there and gently start it. Once it starts going in, and it's obviously it is taking up, then I go to the other screw. Put it in position. Okay. Run it on in. Now both of them have been started. Both of them look good. Now, leaving them just a little bit loose, I go back to this screw and I take it about, there's a gap between the base of the grip and the trigger guard. There's a gap right there. So that kind of lets me gauge it. I want to pull it till that gap starts coming closed. Now I move back up here and now I tighten these up fully. Just like that, good and snug. So that tension is put into the grip. That keeps your grip from doing that pop, pop, wiggle, wiggle and stuff. It's because of that right there. That, all right, good and tight, good and tight. Now I tighten up the grip screw at the bottom. And this gap right here will disappear as it pulls down, or it should. Once it's in position, get it good and snug. Then I go back to my trigger guard screws, good and snug. Make sure that is good and snug. And finally my front one. Put your thumb up there and guide it. And tight. Okay, now cock, let off, cock, let off. Now, bring it back to half cock, slide on barrel, full cock. Does it lock up? Yes. Slowly? Yes. Fast? Yes. Okay, everything's positioned. Now I can lubricate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide that off, and I'm going to take my natural lubricant. I'm going to come up here on the base pin, and I'm going to put me a dollop of lubricant right like that, and I'm going to smear it around. Now I'm also going to go forward and make sure I get this base pin up here. Remember, I put a little bit in the slot itself. Go up and down. Those grease grooves, I want them full of grease. Okay? Just like that. Now, bring it back to half cock. Put the cylinder on there. Rotate the cylinder as I slide it down. Any excess lube I want to build up on the back of it and pull it off. I get almost going home. I pull it back out, and any that builds up here on the ratchet, I get it out. Otherwise it would pack that groove in around the base pin. All the way there. Now that's good and damped. Now I make sure my base pin is good. Remember, I've still got to clean this, so I'm not going to do that. But now I would lubricate a patch heavy with this and run it up and down the barrel in order to lubricate that bore. Okay? Put it in position. The other thing, those pins right there at the base of the frame, make sure you got a little dollop of lube on them, because those, being hardened steel, can rust and stick into the back of the barrel, and you go to wedge it apart and it pulls them out. I need those alignment pins lubricated. Put it in position, put it up there, smack it in position. Cock, all the way down, half cock, spin cylinder. And that, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, is a complete breakdown of a 51 Navy. Okay, now that we've done the physical part, breaking the gun down, etc., and we understand that, how to accurize, and we've got an idea of what we're looking at. Now let's talk about ammunition to feed that, and how to carry powder, and etc. Now most people are going to want to carry powder in some sort of powder flask with some sort of nozzle on it. Perfectly viable for range use. And I have used this many, many times. And so I need a supply of bullets, I need a supply of powder. I like to use wads, and then I like to use CCI caps, but whatever caps you can find that you feel comfortable within, that's the way to go with it. Now, for carrying in the field, the flask and all that becomes a little awkward to me. Okay, so I use pre-created cartridges. You can get from Dixie Gun Works these white vinyl tubes that are flexible and pliable. From this you put a powder charge in, then you put the round ball in, then you put the wad on top, and it's a self-contained unit. Now all I need to do is carry a capper. And with this, I take it and I squeeze it, out comes the wad, I hold that. I squeeze it again, out comes the ball. Now I pour the powder, put in the wad and the ball, stick this back in my pocket. So I can carry pre-made up cartridges. Okay. Also carry paper cartridges, and we're going to talk about that as well. Now paper cartridges, what I've been using is Dustin Waniger's reloading set right here. And it comes with, let's see, which one is this one? That's 44, 36. Here we go. That is a 36 mandrel. This is the mandrel that you will form the cartridge with, and here is a pre-made powder charge on top of it. I think this is like 18 grains or something like that. And then it comes with a base for the actual production of the cartridges. And I've already done videos on this. So paper cartridges are just as viable today as they were during the Civil War. As long as you carry them in something that's watertight and you're not going to have atmospheric problems. Now I do not recommend making up huge amounts of paper cartridges. We in our modern mindset think, well, I want 500 rounds of this and 200 rounds of that, and that's Yeah, but when you make paper cartridges, you're also exposing that powder to the environment. And I live here in Alabama in a very moist area, so just the air itself can eventually cause a cartridge not to work well because the powder will absorb it from the air. So I got to be able to seal it up. So if you're going to make up cartridges, be able to seal it up in something airtight to keep them safe and secure. Okay? I will quite often, let's say we're going to go bunny hunting this weekend, and let's say that I want to use a paper cartridge load. I will go ahead and make up 10, 15, 20 of them and put them in something that's sealed up so that whenever I go to the field, I have my little magazine I put on my hip that I'll load up, and I have the rest of them wrapped up in tin foil to seal them out of the elements pretty much, and that's what I'll hunt with. They work perfectly fine like that. But I recommend against loading up 15 or 20, 100 of them, and unless you got some airtight way to seal them up. Okay? Now, projectiles. For the vast majority of shooting, I prefer for my 51 Navy a 380 round ball. And I cast it myself. I got a Lee mold, and it's just a standard round ball. You want to use pure lead if at all possible. With modern bullets, you'll have lead and tin mix. That's because of the higher speeds that are produced in modern ammunition. You don't want to get leading in the barrel. And at the higher pressures that are produced in modern guns, you don't want to get leading in the barrel. And pressing it into into a brass case, soft lead wants to deform easier than this, so they make these a little harder as far as modern bullets, so that they don't, deform when they're loading them. Well, when you're shooting in a cap ball revolver, you want it to deform. You want it to be soft enough that whenever you put it into the gun and squeeze it, this stops being a round ball and it mashes into something more like a marshmallow shape, where it's been flattened on the top, the gas pressure is going to flatten the bottom, and all of this becomes bore diameter. It's a slug going down range. And the productivity it produces in game hunting is that flat end smacking like a square top bullet. And so that's why. Now, how do you know if the lead is soft enough? Take your fingernail and bear down and put a mark. If your fingernail will cut it and leave a mark on it, that's soft enough lead. If it does not leave a mark, that lead's too hard. Blackie, I have a supply of lead that seems to be a little too hard. Can I still use it? Yes, for plinking or target work. And it'll work fine. It just won't be as good as pure lead. You can also, if you got a Lee production pot or something, you can put the lid on and let it cook for a while. Just keep it hot and let it go and stir it every so often. You'll see more and more impurities come out of it, and you're cooking the tin and stuff out of it. So you can take number 2 lead or whatever and cook it for about an hour and have relatively pure lead, because all those other additives will slowly melt out. Okay? So I have taken lead before out of a shooting range and cooked it in a big pot for like 2 hours and skim it off. And what I had was, I would cast a ball, let it cool, and then I'd see if I could mark it with my thumb. If I couldn't, I kept cooking. When I got to where the ball's coming out, I could mark with my thumb, I went to running ball and casting, because now I've cooked that lead down to where it's softer lead. Okay? Now, I know somebody's going to ask, conicals. Conical bullets are very viable as a hunting tool. But let us talk about why, when that 51 Navy right there was a military arm, why they issued conical bullets. Military wants penetration. Okay? You've got massed ranks of troops, guys all standing up here in line side by side, and there's a guy this far behind me, and da-da-da. If that bullet went through something kind of soft on me, it might get him too. So they wanted penetration. Round ball does better, in my experience, in actual game hunting of small game and stuff. Round ball's a better choice. It just performs better. And conical bullets are better when the game becomes a lot bigger. Like, for example, hog. Elmer Keith writes in his book, Six Guns, about an event that actually happened during the Civil War when a Confederate officer was captured by a Union officer and was being escorted back behind the lines to a command area. And that some of the Union soldiers were trying to catch a hog that was down in this gully because they wanted him for food. And as the officer and the Confederate officer rode up, the hog broke cover and ran out. And the Bluebellies went to yelling at the officer, "Shoot him, shoot him, shoot him!" And the officer swung his 51 Navy over and shot the hog behind the ear and dropped him clean. As he finished that shot, a second hog broke cover and took off, and he shot that one as well and killed him with the 51 Navy shot at the back of the head. So we know documentable this stuff worked in the day, right? I have seen hog and other similar sized game, hog, goat, things like that drop with the 51 Navy. I have done it and other people have done it in my presence. So yes, it can be very viable. The conical is a better choice if I've got to penetrate in big game. But this is the wrong gun for such things. I'm going to be straight up, guys. I would not willingly choose to try to take something like a big deer or something like that with a 36. I'd go to the 44s, if not go up for a dragoon. That's just common sense. But having said that, have I ever shot one? Yes. It was something where we weren't expecting a hog. I was out bunny hunting. He broke cover at 10 feet from me, and I shot him. And he went down because I knew how to place the bullet. Was I shooting conical? No, I was shooting round ball. But it did just as good for what I was applying. So the conical is a better big game hunter within the limitations of this gun, being a big game hunter. It's going to be archery range of 10 to 15 yards, out of a stand probably, and the biggest thing I would do would be a hog. I wouldn't attempt deer, although I know it can be done. But for me personally, that's just me talking, I wouldn't go for a deer one. I just wouldn't. Okay? Okay, before you start doing load development for any gun, here, take my advice from a little bit of experience. Get a notebook. Notebooks are cheap. Write on it, gun, load development, whatever. You can use this for multiple guns. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to put a header and I'm going to put 51 Navy, and I'm going to start, I'm going to document down, I like this load worked good, this powder, this whatever. Write down your notes, because this may take several range sessions to work this out, and you want to keep your starting point. Once you get it dialed in and you know that it's this powder, this load, this ball, this whatever, that's when you go to another separate book. Get one of these little bitty small notebooks that's nothing and label it by what it is, and then you're going to sit there and say, here's the gun, da 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 da, and in here you're going to document everything about that gun. Document its serial number in case the gun gets stolen. They don't look for books. Anything else that you've done special to that thing, like I changed out this spring or whatever, keep a record of it. All the loads. Here's my hunting load, here's my target load, here's my shot load, here's etc. So that later on, after you've cleaned and put this into the gun safe, and a year's gone by, and you know, dang, I hadn't shot that 51 Navy in ever, and you dig it out and you can't remember what the load is. There you go. I have one of these little books for every one of my guns. And that way, if I'm not shooting it regularly, let's say like my Spiller and Burt, I will go, we're going to go to the range, and I'll pop this open and I'll look at it right quick, and okay, target load was, and I'll just remind myself. That way I've got a working knowledge, and this will then stay at home unless I make more changes, in which case they go into the big notebook and then they're transcribed into the little notebook. See, it's just, trust me, experience teaches you it works a lot better this way. Okay, now let's talk about how to come up with your chamber capacity and etc. I'm going to show you this in a minute. But when Colt was designing the gun, he had a certain power level in mind. That's the reason the cylinder is the size that it is. Okay, so if you're not going to have a full cylinder, there's certain considerations you need to understand. So let's look at first. Here we will say is a very crude representation of the cylinder. Base pin going through the middle. Okay? Now you have the chamber that comes in, and this chamber right here goes all the way back to the back where the nipple hooks into. Okay? This capacity, how big this is important for us to know, because we're going to base a lot of things off of it so we don't waste powder and etc. For the best accuracy, we want the bullet up here at a beginning, up here at the front end, at a certain depth, very close to the front end, so that each chamber is consistent across, so it's the same jumping point, we will say. So from there to here, this is the capacity of it. Okay? So let's figure out how much your cylinder holds. And here's how we're going to do that. Now let's figure out chamber capacity. We're going to take our cylinder out of our gun. I want a piece of paper or a piece of aluminum foil, and I'm going to go ahead and ahead of time pre-crease it down the middle. Okay? Something fairly heavy piece of paper. Next, I'm going to take an adjustable powder measure, and I'm going to take a guess of what I think it is. Let's say 40 grains, and I'm going to set it to 40 grains. I'm going to open it up, I'm going to fill it to 40 grains, and then I'm going to pour it into the chamber to see what the capacity is. If there's more powder than will go into it, I'll show you that now. So I'm going to fill it up. Now, closing it up, I'm going to pour it into the cylinder. Okay, you can see it's spilled over, there's too much powder. So what I'm going to do is pour that powder back out, give it a good tap, knock it out. Now I'm going to adjust my powder measure. I'm going to go down on it like 5 grains. And now I'm going to take the piece of paper, I'm going to pick it up, and I'm going to funnel it back into that measure, like this. Okay. Now that my powder measure is full, give it a little tap, wipe off the excess, and now I pour it back into that chamber. Now it's full flush all the way across. That now tells me what my capacity is. And my capacity in my case is 28 grains. Whatever yours is, that will tell you what your actual capacity is. Now let's talk about what capacity tells us. Okay, now that we've measured the cylinder, and I know that mine holds about 28 grains of my powder that I'm using, I now know something I can extrapolate backwards because of volume. Okay, so that ball sitting in that position is holding X amount of volume. I remember when I was young, it was the thing that really rammed this idea home to me. Was it was showing a lock over in England that had been built in the early 1800s, and it actually lifted ships up and down. And what it was basically an elevator. That there was this section. Now that we've got that in place, let's talk about target load. It's going to be a super light load, right? This is the extreme. Okay, I have a capacity of 20 grains that I can put in there. So how low can I go? A, to use the minimum amount of powder that I need. B, find the smallest boom and bang, so very little recoil, very controllable, and all I'm doing is poking a hole in a paper target. I'm not hunting with this. I'm trying to poke a hole in a paper target, so I want the most consistency, the smallest group, for the least powder possible. Okay? Now, the rammer on the gun, whenever it comes down to its full extension, it only goes so far down into that cylinder, doesn't it? because the cylinder has a given depth. And so how far down can that compress down? That's a question. Now in the 36, this is not that huge a thing because the chamber capacity is so small. But it will become more prevalent later on whenever we're talking about bigger guns like Walker and stuff like that, because you can put a small enough powder charge in this cylinder, into a cylinder, let's say a Walker cylinder. Let's say if I put 10 grains into a Walker cylinder and then I ram that ball all the way down, there's an air gap between the two because the chamber capacity is so great. There's an air gap. We never want an air gap in a percussion revolver. It's dangerous. Okay. But since the 51 Navy has a smaller cylinder and we've only got a 20 grain capacity to begin with, we are safe in saying let's start at like 10 grains. Okay. And I recommend we start out with a target load of 10 grains and then work up or down until you find the sweet spot. But realize that if I go down, I'm going to have to start adding filler because of that depth, remember? So here's what I recommend you do. Start with 10 grains and then go up like a grain at a time, 1 or 2 grains, till you get to like 15. If you're not seeing the accuracy you want, go the other way and go back down. But below 10 grains, start adding filler. Now, what is a filler? That's really simple. Since we've got the ball right here, and we've got a capacity from down here to here of 20 grains, okay, I put 10 grains in, and it's loose enough that with that ball, it's going to seat just a little bit deeper. It will fill up this chamber. There's no air gap. But what if I go down to 5 grains? Well, it's only going to come down to about right there. I need to fill in this space with a little bit of it. So, we're going to load up a target load, just for demonstration purposes, of 5 grains to show you how to load it. Okay? Here we go. Okay, I'm going to set my powder measure down to just 10 grains. Okay. I'm now going to fill up the powder measure, give it a good tap, wipe off the excess, and I'm going to fill up the cylinder, keeping track with which one I just filled up. Now the way that I do it is I start with the one at 12 o'clock position and I go around the clock. Each time I keep the cylinder in the same place. I don't turn it, and I just set it back down when I'm done with it. Okay? Okay, now that I've loaded every chamber, I give it a little to stabilize it. I'm going to take my excess powder off of here now. Wipe off the top. And now I'm going to take my instant grits and I'm going to fill the chamber up just about to the top all the way around. Now you can put this into a flask to dispense it a lot more consistently, but you can see I'm just doing this for demonstration. Okay, wipe off the excess, get rid of the grits. Now I'm going to use this pen, I'm going to give just a little compression on each one. Usually grits, cornmeal, all that will compress so much. I should be able to get a round ball in there with no problem. We're about to find out. By compressing it, see, it doesn't pour out as easy. Now, I put it back onto the gun. back onto the gun. I put my barrel back on. I go through and I now ram it. And that will compress that filler down tight, giving me plenty of room for the ball. Okay, now I get the ball. Now drop in the ball, rotate it underneath, send it home. Make sure it's all the way snug against that filler. Okay, now I have hit each time it cut off a ring, and I'm all loaded up with this target load. Now I've lubricated the barrel heavily because this is going to be a dirty load, I know it, so I'm just going to load that barrel up heavily to keep my fouling soft. Let me cap it and we'll shoot it. Okay, with the little 10 grain charge and the filler. Now guys, let's just be straight up. I'm old and my eyesight is not as what it used to be. In the last year, year and a half, my eyesight has really gone south. I see distance fine. It's within 3 feet of my nose. It's not so good no more. And so seeing the sights is a little difficult for me. I put on glasses, I can see the sights, but then I can't see the target. So a lot of this is going to be using the force. So you'll forgive me if I use a prop to steady my hand up on, because I'm kind of working with it. But here we go, 10 grade target shot. Okay, that ain't a match winner, I can tell you right now. But we'll go down there and we'll take a look at it. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1 in the bullseye for 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What does that pattern tell you? It's not consistent. Okay, that's a pattern, not a group. A pattern means they're all kind of going in this area. A group is they're all going consistently into an area. So I can tell by that I probably need to go up on power. So like I said, you're going to start with a given. I started with 10. I know that mine is not 10 grains, but we're talking about your gun. So I'm teaching you the technique. So we're going to start with 10 and filler. You saw how I filled the chamber full, pressed it down, then I went and put the ball in. So it's full all the way. Well, 10 wasn't it. Go up to like 12. Go up to 14, 15. And if it's still not doing it, go the other way. Go down to 8. go down to 5. Don't go below 5 grains. Okay, it just, you're getting there where the filler and the powder may not, you know, and you may end up where the powder's all the way over here and the filler gets to the touch hole and you don't get no bang. See, so you're just filling up the chamber. But that pattern right there, still it's the size of my hand. It's something I can work with. I wouldn't be bunny hunting with that, and I wouldn't be winning no matches with that. So the object of the game here is, this is how you start with it. Now, on the next triangle up, right up here, let me put my general purpose load into it, which is about 18 grains. And let's see how that does. But it's very, very labor intensive, as you saw. Me having to put in the filler and etc. to fill up that space and guarantee that I have consistent depth and a consistent load. So whenever we're shooting and loading, the most time consuming one to me is a true target load. I'd rather use a general purpose load, and that's where we're going now. So my general purpose load is 18 grains. That's slightly under its maximum capacity, isn't it? But it shoots the most consistent, and it shoots more to the sights at that level. And so that's what I'm shooting with it. Now let me give you a demonstration right quick of what it looks like when I'm shooting it at an 18 grain charge with a round ball. Okay, here's my general purpose load of 18 grains of powder with a Wonder Wad and a 380 pure lead round ball. This is my general purpose load, the one I use for small game hunting and etc. Okay. Man, I am shaking like a leaf, guys. Woo! Bunnies would be running circles around me right now. Woo! Sitting there like you're shaking like that. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right there. It's a smaller group than this was, with one flyer, and that's me. I'll fess up that in the middle. But that's about, about a 2-inch group, something like that. Still minted a bunny, and I wouldn't have any trouble being on a bunny, but I mean, guys, I'm sorry. I'm getting a very feel like I'm doing like that. Trying to aim. I'm just old and it's hard to hold it still anymore, but I'm gonna do my best. Okay, now I'm gonna take that same load, but instead of that round ball and that wad, I'm gonna replace it with a Kato Ojama bullet. We're gonna go for that top one. That's my heavy load. Now what does this teeth show us right here? Exclude that. I'm a little bit to the left. Well, sun's that way and the light's a little brighter on that side of the sight so I can see it better, yeah. but that's a very consistent little group right there with the most of them going right here and 2 outliers. So would it be able to take small game at say 10 to 15 yards? Yes, I'd feel confident busting bunnies with it as long as I could hold steady and I could see it. That's the thing. One of my favorite lines in John Wayne movie was in Big Jake, whenever the Indian shows up and tells him he's got no gun. And he turns around to grab one and he says, "Near or far?" And the Indian said, "Near, eyes no good." And he turns around and hands him a shotgun. He picks up his own and says, "Me too." I fully relate to that. All right, let me reload, and this time we're going to be going with the Kato Ojama hunting bullet. Be right back. Okay, so that's an 18 grain charge. That's a general purpose. That's what I shoot for just fun. Okay, I use that for small game hunting because of the round ball and that. It's more than bunny busting accurate, and I can use it for a general purpose carrying, etc. But what if we're going up? Well, we're limited to 20 grain capacity. Okay, so I'm gonna want the maximum boom and bang I can get because I'm going for something bigger, like hog. What I recommend is, if I think I need it, and the only thing, to be honest, I think that I would consider big game for a 51 Navy would be a hog. Close range, shot behind the ear, something like that. And I would like to, I have used a round ball in the past, but the Kato Ojama hunting bullets give me a distinct advantage. Okay, these are the Kato Ojama bullets. Let it focus in right there. There we go. It's a Keith type bullet that has a flat top ogive and it's a reduced shank so it sits into the chamber better. It's got lubricating grooves so I can carry lube on it. And it's 145 grains. Now I shoot this with a 20 grain charge, and then I've got a lube on it and I ram it. It's 380. It's hard to load. I'm not going to give you any BS because it is a full bore and it's going to be a tight fit. But this would be the best performer, in my opinion, if you're going to hunt anything bigger than a bunny with it, because it's got the design to do it. Now, as you can see, when you set it up there, it sits in fairly easily. Some guns you're going to have to open them up in the loading gate to make it work. Mine will work without it. Okay. The Kato Ojama bullets have got a reduced shank, so you can set them in there like that and they just drop in, and then you just simply rotate them underneath the loading lever. Mine has no problem because, as you can see, the 51 Navy has a large forcing cone. That makes a large window right there. The 51 Navy was shot heavily with conicals during the Civil War. So it takes conicals fairly well, and it isn't a mine. Yours may be a slightly different manufacturer, and you may have to get in here and open this window up a little, and you'll see that when you go to do it. See where it's binding, and you just take a Dremel tool and open it up a little and then blue it. Okay? But that works just fine. Now, a word on conicals. Conicals are specialized load, and to me their job is big game hunting when I need that kind of power. Think of it like putting nitrous oxide on a car. You don't need that kind of horsepower unless you're racing or something. Okay, it puts a lot of wear and tear and stress on a gun because it's much harder to ram those in, and so you're putting a lot of strain on your base pin and on your loading lever. It's more on your forcing cone when you're firing. It's more on your rifling. So in the long run, it's going to wear your gun out faster. Now, it's not going to wear it out in 100, 200, 300. Okay. But in the long run, it would be a whole lot of, pressure on it. So save this for when it really is mattering. Use the round ball for 90% of your stuff. Now, Blackie, how about the other bullets like the Johnson & Dow and stuff like that? Those are really good bullets, but again, do you need a conical? It has been my experience that conicals are not as accurate as round ball. That can be an exception, and let me show you one exception to mine. The Richmond bullet by Arrows Gone Bullet Molds is a very accurate one. It's more of a ballette. See how it's swelled up like a sugar cone. It's still got a rebated, and it's almost like a round ball on top. Once you ram it, it actually looks more like a round ball. That point kind of goes away once you ram it. But it's a very big full bore. It's 380. It's very tight loading it. But my 61 Navy and my 51 Navy shoot it very accurately. It's just harder to load. Now, lubrication. What I do for mine, here's a little tub of them pre-made up. These are the Kato bullets that I just showed. But what I do is I take a little butter tub like this, and I take liquid Alox that you can get from Lee Precision, just a couple of drops in it. Put the balls in there, put the lid on, and swirl it around so they coat over each other. And then I pour it out on aluminum foil and set them up and let them dry. It takes them about a half hour or so to dry. After that, they've got this lubricant coating on them. This helps with leading and etc. And to me, it does increase the velocity just a little bit because they're lubricated. And as we talked about, whenever we're shooting with a cap and ball revolver, lubrication is your friend. We want the bore lubed. Okay? Now, carrying the loads in the field. I like to carry the plastic tubes that you get from Dixie Gun Works. These white vinyl tubes is my preferred way to carry in the field, because it's very rugged, very durable, relatively watertight, and I do not have to worry about moisture getting in and fouling up the powder. For target loads to carry to the range, I don't like to even consider carrying a target load in the field, because yes, you got that actually, but it's so weak. What are you hunting, chipmunks? I mean, I did admit I did try squirrel hunting one time with target loads. I had one that was so finely accurate that I wanted to try to take squirrel with it, and it's just not a responsible thing to do, guys, really. But if you were going to try to carry a field load of a target load, or set it up so when I go to the range, it's already pre-measured. You want some sort of measuring container. You would pour in your filler first, and then the powder, because remember, we're going to turn it upside down, so the powder has to pour out first, and then the filler down on top of it. Okay? For standard field load with a round ball, all I have to do is pour the measured charge into this tube. I put the round ball up there and squeeze it in, so it'll just go in like that. And then I take a Wonder Wad and I put it into the top and press it in just like that. Hope that focuses on that for you. And so there would be a complete load ready to go. Now when I go to use it in the field, I pull this out, I take my thumb and I squeeze it, and that Wonder Wad kind of pucks up, and I pick it up and put it in my other hand. Put it right there at the corner of my pinky and my ring finger. Now I squeeze the tube and up comes the round ball. I take the round ball and hold it. Now I take the powder, pour it into the cylinder, put the wad in, then the ball in. And that's how I carry these in the field. Makes for quick, easy shooting without having to carry a powder and flask and etc. Okay, this will be loaded with a Kato Ojama hunting bullet. These are the ones that I showed you that I've already tumble lubed and ready to go. And it's going to be the same load of 18 grains plus that. Now this is tight. When I wedge it in there, this is a full chamber. This is full as we're going. Okay, so this is the maximum bang for the buck I'm going to get out of this gun. And this would be a heavy hunting load. Okay. Now let's see what we got out of that. Okay. This was the flyer from this group, remember? So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 right there. Centered up relatively around my aiming point, which was here. Just a little bit high. A little left, a little right, and one dead on. So that shows with a little more refinement, I'd be able to dial that in, wouldn't I? So I'm using 18 grains of this powder. What if I change to 18 grains of this powder? I should back it down a little bit. Okay, so with 18 grains of this powder, with that Kato Ojama hunting bullet, it's a full heavy load. It was centered. It's relatively a round group. It's not all strung off. It's not vertical. It's a relatively round group. Could I get it smaller? Possible. I could try backing down to 15 grains and changing to another powder like 777 and coming back up. Or what if I was to change the lubrication just a little bit, or the seating depth just a little bit. Maybe it doesn't like 18, but it needs 16 grains, you see. Well, that's what you want, a consistent, relatively round group where it's going a little left, a little right, but it's relatively round. That's when you're telling you're getting close. So for my gun, we've concluded that the 10 grain is not the target load, and I know it's not, but I wanted to show you the process. That target loads are the most time consuming of all of them to create, because you have to measure it, get the filler, etc. And if you're a bullseye shooter, that may be worth your time. As far as for a general purpose hunting load, 18 grains for mine seems to work just fine for a round ball group. Now I need to play with it a little bit, absolutely. Need to be a day where my eyes are pretty good and I'm not sitting there shaking like a leaf. But yeah, that's just age and oldness and poor health catching up with me. But at the same time, that Kato Ojama bullet gave a relatively round, good group. Could I use that on large game at, say, 25 yards? Remember, I'm not shooting a chipmunk, I'm shooting a 200-pound hog. Yes, as long as I can consistently put my bullet into my target zone, then I can. So could the 51 Navy be used for this? Yes, within reason. 1, establish your load. 2, determine your own personal maximum range. And let's talk about that right quick. So, Blackie, I want to practice for hunting. Okay? Here's how I teach people to practice to be a good shooter and a good hunter with a cap and ball revolver. I want you to get a cardboard box. Something, roughly that big. Okay? I want you to stick a paper plate up to it. I want you to just put some sort of mark in the middle of that paper plate. I want you to pick how far you want to start. Let's say 10 yards. I want you to set it up, and I want you to get one of them kitchen timers. Okay? Or you can use your phone if you want to. I want you to set that timer for 1 minute. Okay? 60 seconds. I want you to have 5 rounds in your gun. I want you to say go. I want you to bring it up and put all 5 rounds on that paper plate in less than 1 minute. That's almost 10 seconds a shot, right? 1 round on that paper plate every 10 seconds, or all 5 on that paper plate in 1 minute. You can do it. Back it up 5 yards. Now do it again. Back it up 5 yards. When you get to where you're sweating blood and you're running out of time, or you're not hitting them, you've reached your maximum range. Be that 10 yards or 40 yards. You have to be able to shoot consistently at speed. And so that's how I teach people to learn how to shoot consistently at speed, because that's how I learned to shoot bunnies. We would go out and we would shoot like that. And my family had chickens. And I remember me and my granddaddy sitting on the back porch, and him taking an old 38 Model 10 Smith & Wesson and taking the shells out of it so it was empty. And here I was, a young boy, and he sat me up on the fence overlooking the chickens. And he went to throwing chicken feed. And he said, I want you to aim at a chicken as he runs by. Aim at his head. Of course, there's no bullets. I'm not shooting. But it was tracking the target. And a chicken don't run in a straight line. A chicken runs like that. Well, you get to where you can keep it on the chicken head, by God, bunnies is easy then. But you've got to practice with a purpose. If you're not interested in any kind of hunting, you're just going to come out to do this for target work, absolutely develop a target load, whatever it may be. Okay? The reason I showed you how to do filler was you want to go really low. How low can I go and get the tightest screw? I don't know. It varies from gun to gun. But you can find somewhere in there the most accurate load for that gun. Go from 375 to 380 bullets. Try using them lubricated, unlubricated. Always have the bore lubricated. Try different powders. There's several different powders available. Try different caps. Try different seating depths or how much pressure you're putting on it whenever you squeeze it. All of those factors affect performance and therefore where the bullet places. And the 51 Navy is a great gun for this because it has a relatively small capacity but good performance for that capacity. So I'm not using a lot of powder. I'm using 18 grains for a 51 Navy. I'm using 30 grains in my 44. So automatically I'm going to go through a pound of powder a lot faster in my 1860 Army than I will in my 51 Navy. Okay, so let us pull it all together for conclusion. What I've talked about with all of this, we find out what the chamber capacity of the cylinder is. From that, we use volume measure and find out a starting point for how much powder we should start with for a given thing. We know what the minimum is because we've measured to make sure how far the rammer can compress a given projectile. We recognize the different kinds of projectiles that we'll be using. Round ball for 90% of your shooting and general purpose, and then the hunting bullets if I'm wanting a big hit to try to take a larger game animal, or for penetration, such as like with the Richmond bullet, where I'm needing deep penetration for whatever application you're going for. For strictly target work on a range like this, I want to do the minimum load that I can get away with and therefore save as much powder as I can to make it easier. Get more shots per pound. The Colt, as we have talked about, this gun kind of paved the way for it, really. I mean, it really did. And it was from this gun that all the later ones, such as the 60 Army and etc., had a chance. This showed it could be done. This showed you could have a sidearm on you that was reliable, accurate, carried good stopping power for its day, and gave you good resistance to the weather for its day. And was a size and weight that could be carried equal for what had been the old single shot big bores before it. So therefore this was a distinct advantage over it. Sorry for the aircraft guy. So the 51 Navy has been one of my favorite guns my whole life. It is the most classic gun to me. The square back trigger guard. Yes, I know the round trigger guard fits your hand better and it's easier to shoot because it doesn't rub your knuckle. But to me, that right there is the classic Colt, to me, is the old 51 Navy. And it's one of my favorite hunting guns to go out and bust bunnies with and try to do small game. Now, as we've already said, you work up your load. You have your load book for your gun. You work up what's going to be the maximum target accuracy load. Smallest possible group load. What am I going to use that? I have used that to shoot squirrels out of a tree with before, because I need pinpoint accuracy to try to shoot a squirrel. It's a very small target up there in the tree, and you can only do this in very safe conditions where I'm not going to worry about hitting anybody or anything else. And so it has to be for very small targets. That's when we're betting beer money and we're trying to shoot very small targets, like shooting poker chips or shooting charcoal briquettes hung on a string at 20 yards or 10 yards out. Try to bust them at that range. That's the bragging money. Is it practical? A whole lot of work to make up that load. Very time consuming. My general purpose load, I need to know its capabilities and its point of impact. And that's going to be the one I'm going to do for 90% of my shooting. That's going to be my bunny hunting and general carrying, etc. The heavy load is set up, do I want it with this bullet or not? You know, is it worth it for the fancy conicals? I have taken pretty large things with a round ball before. And as I said, the round ball does more damage than you would expect, because when it's pure lead, it does a better job than we expect. The conicals give you the penetration, but the round ball gives you more impact. That's all I can say. It doesn't truly expand, but it arbitrates on impact and transfers energy better, in my opinion. And that's from real world shooting, everything up to hog and etc. And having seen it done on a deer before, as I mentioned. So therefore, yes, it can be very viable within its limitations. It can be a very viable field gun, and I enjoy carrying and using one. But in the long run, it's your personal choice. The gun, the 51 Navy, is a fantastic gun. And to me, anyone shooting black powder, you have to have a 51 at least once and try it out. And you'll find out why Colt liked them so much and why it built the Colt Empire. Hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Please hit that like button if you did. I'd agree. And please leave any comments or questions. I'll be happy to answer all that I can for you. This video will be up until the 1st of January, and then I'll be taking it down. Thank you very much for participating in my class, and thank you very much for your support of my channel. Until next time, I'm Blackie, wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.